everyone, and thanks for joining. My name is Tracy Cook, and I'm the Online Media Manager for ModernAnalyst.com, the premier community for business analysts. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar entitled, One More Time, Do We Have to Still Write Requirements? Today's webinar will last approximately 60 minutes, including the question and answer session at the end. So please be sure to submit your questions in advance using the questions feature of the GoToWebinar software. Today's featured speaker is Steve Blaze, PMP, PMI, and PBA, author, consultant, teacher, and coach. Steve has over 55 years of experience in information technologies. Steve, welcome.
Thank you, Tracy, and welcome everyone. We're going to look at kind of an age-old question. Goes all the way back to 1960s when I started, probably long before most of you were even born. And the question is, do we have to write requirements? Can't we just code? I was a software engineer at the time, that was my title. And people would come in and say, okay, I have this document that I've been handwriting, can you put this on the computer? And we sit there and talk about it, and then I'd take it away and drop some data forms for 5081 cards and tape, and I'd run the code and bring back a report and say, is this what you want? Oh, let's fix this and this and this. And after a while, it would come out. There was no written requirements, nothing that was formal. And so the first time I had a situation where they said, we need to write these formal requirements up. Or after you finish, you need to write up the requirements of what you did, which didn't make any sense to me. But that's the question. We've been doing this now for a long time. Do we still need to write requirements, especially when you're talking about agile, any flavor of agile, or design thinking, or data analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning? Do we have to have requirements? All these technical requirements from formal forms? Well, let's take a look and see what the answer to that might be. Let's start with, what is a requirement? Okay. There's a dictionary definition: a thing that is needed or wanted, a thing that is compulsory, a necessary condition. There's what requirements are. You see, the definition of requirement in the dictionary is different. Requirements in the dictionary is just more of things that are needed, more of things that are compulsory. But we have a different definition for requirements. It describes the characteristics of a proposed system. In fact, we might even consider requirement as lowercase and requirements as uppercase, right? It describes what the systems, and usually it's from the system's end user, that we're now currently calling consumer, right? Now let's take one more look here, one more time to look at the requirements here. Here's the IEEE requirements definition, and this is the three-part definition from Marlin Dorfman, if I remember correctly, and this has been around since, I don't know, 90s or earlier, maybe late 80s. I don't remember when this came out as part of the standards. And it says that a condition or capability needed by a user to solve a problem. Two is condition of capability must be possessed by the system so that the user can solve that problem. And three, a documented representation. That's always been a bit of a concern, especially in, walk around as a consulting game. They need a documented representation to be a real requirement. Yeah, but it doesn't say that it has to be a business requirements document. It doesn't say it has to be a concept of operations. It just says it has to be documented in some way. In other words, if you consider that a user story is a requirement, then you have a documented representation if it's written down on a 3x5 card. So, one more time, why are requirements needed? Well, to understand what has to be done. That's, I asked you why you need the requirements. You say, well, it helps me understand, helps everybody understand what has to be done. It's I don't remember who said it Alan, don't remember his name, but said in a book he wrote back in the 80s, it establishes the starting point for the evolution of the system. It serves as a foundation for the product scope, cost, and schedule. Theoretically, it is a contract between the business and the development team, the solution team. The internal business, that's a unit other than the development team, it's a contract between somebody internally and the development team, the solution team, or an external business like a supplier or a vendor. Now, the overall purpose is communication. Now, this last point, the contract, is usually something that, and I mention it to business analysts, you're creating a contract here. They say, no, it's just requirements. You write down something, you go over it, you agree on it, and it's signed. How else would you define a contract? The party that wants it holds you to that contract that you're going to complete it, and the party that's doing it says, I'm only going to do what's in the contract. A contract. Now let's step one step back here. Serves as the foundation for product scope, cost, and schedule, theoretically. So what do we mean by theoretically? Well, we want to define the problem and solution, okay? Then we're going to define the requirements which are used to determine the overall scope, cost, and schedule. This is what we are going to do to solve that problem. This produces the solution. At that point, theoretically, we are supposed to then determine how much it will cost and what the schedule will be, how long it will take, and so forth. That's the way it was originally intended to be, and theoretically still is today. That's the importance of requirements. And if you're going to do that, then yeah, we got to write it down. Unfortunately, in reality, there's your boss or some other manager comes to you and says, all right, you're the BA. This is what we need to have done. This is when we need it. And this is the budget. So go get the requirements. I don't have the requirements yet. We can't do this theoretical thing because I haven't gotten the requirements. But I got the solution. I got the budget. I got the deadline. Now I go get the requirements. From that perspective, is it really necessary to have written requirements? Again, let's take a look. Here are the traditional elements. Now you got the project's charter and scope statement at a high level, and you've got the business requirements document and the concept of operations from IEEE. And then you got a product definitions with the functional requirements specification and the system requirements specification. And oh, let's not forget the software requirements specification. And then if you're going object oriented, you might even have a use case model. A whole bunch of things that are documents that we have to fill out sometimes. And you go to IEEE, and I am an IEEE member. I'm not making fun of IEEE. You go to IEEE, and you've got to do the concept operations, followed by the system requirement specifications, followed by the software requirement specifications. It's systems engineering. We've got to get it all down up front. Well, that's okay if that works. But I mean, what we're talking about is something that looks like this. We've got the problem domain. And in the problem domain, we have a problem. Well, that makes sense. And over there in the solution domain, we have a solution. Now, please don't look at this. And I've gotten into discussions with Scott Ambler about this. He doesn't think this is a good representation of the problem and solution domain because it implies that the business people have problems and the IT people have solutions, and that they are separated. There's a space there between them. And we shouldn't be doing that. We should be, getting together. Well, I want you to try to imagine, this is two-dimensional. I want you to try to imagine 3 dimensions where you've got the problem domain, where the business people are using, the consumers are using the whatever it is. There is a problem, and then we solve it. When we do, the solution now becomes the new problem domain. We're now using that same system now with the problem fixed. I can't draw that kind of 3 dimensions, so it's side by side. So please don't draw any conclusions that it also doesn't say necessarily that that's IT. The problem does not have to be something that IT fixes. Although today, I would venture to say that every single one of you out there is working some way with some kind of computer technology. Now, between the problem and the solution, and as Jerry Weinberg says, a problem is the difference between the way things are now and someone's perception of the way they should be, their vision. The difference between that makes the problem. That is defined as a gap. Now, I don't want to get into gap analysis and all that. What I want to show here is that between the problem and solution is a gap, and that gap is closed by requirements. The requirements specify the solution. They have everything that is necessary to be done to solve the problem. I get a problem. There's a, my page numbers stop at 99. I got a document that's 118 pages, but it, hits 99 and then doesn't do anything. We got a masking error. One statement of requirements will fix that. On the other hand, building a cryptocurrency wallet to embed in our phones, that's a lot of requirements to close that. That is why we do the requirements, to define what it is we have to do to close that gap. Now, the issue basically is one of formalized versus non-formalized. And formalized documentation, formalized requirements, and it apply to all documentation is that we're going to keep it. We're going to write it in such a way that we can keep it and people can go back and look at it, which means we got to make sure the spelling is right and the format's right and it's complete and accurate and all of that. Okay. And we're going to use this when we want to create that permanent historical record. We want to, a contract between the solution team and the business stakeholders who are paying for this solution to be developed. And of course, if you're going to do that, it's going to be formal. And clearly, we're going to keep it. But there's a big downside to formalized requirements. We've got to accept an obligation. And that obligation is that we're going to keep this up to date and current. That requires a formal change control process, not only to control the changes of the system, but also to ensure that those changes get back into the requirements contract. So we haven't written a contract to do X and we end up with a system that does Y. The more documents you have, the more requirements documents have, the more time you've got to spend keeping them up to date and concurrent. And the longer period of time that document is maintained, the more likely it is the document will get out of sync. Now, on the other hand, you have this other side. We're going to use them for analysis, them being requirements documents, any documents. We're going to use them to solve a problem, answer a question, communicate information, and once that the goal has been achieved, once I've solved the problem or answered the question, we can dispose of it, toss it out. We don't need it anymore. It served its purpose. So for our purposes here, let's call this the formal document and this the informal document. And as you will see, if we just say written document requirements, then the answer is, well, yes and no. Maybe we obviously need to write formal requirements, but maybe we don't need to write informal requirements. Well, let's ask another question here one more time. Are these following requirements? And I'll give a pause to see if you can answer. I won't ask a poll or anything, just on your own. First of all, a business requirements document. It says it's requirements, but is it really requirements? How about a use case model, including the use case narratives? Good old product backlog. Isn't that requirements? How about the user story? Certainly, that's got to be requirements. Well, remember that we want requirements to describe the solution completely. That is to say, everything that needs to be done. We would say that in our vernacular as functional requirements, non-functional requirements, constraints. 3 of those there, use cases, product backlog, and the user stories, well, not necessarily product backlog, use cases and user stories are functional only by definition. We may have non-functional requirements on the product backlog and other things that need to be done that may not be software oriented. The other things that need to be done, say by the business, changing job descriptions, which I had to do for one job as a business analyst, as part of the, at that point, quote unquote requirements, they had to change the job descriptions because we were changing jobs. Well, that never appeared on the business requirements document. And do they tell the solution team, I am a developer, I write code, or I'm building a database, or whatever it is on the solution team, does it tell me everything I need to know to implement the solution? Trying to answer those questions as well as being within the IEEE definition means that none of these are really requirements in that, from that definition. Well, okay, one more time. Who needs these requirements? How about the business stakeholders? If I said, who are you writing these requirements for? There's a good percentage of you who would say, well, I'm writing for the users, for the business, for the consumers. Now, I want to take a second here to point out that I'm using the term consumers because today, back in the day, we had most of the stuff we did as business analysts back in the 90s, 80s, and so forth. Most of the stuff we did were for internal users. I did very little. In fact, I can't think of anything I did up until this century or so, and even past 5 years, were directly for the external customers of the company. Customers were people in the company. The accounts payable manager, the credit manager, the operations manager, the accounts payable clerk. Those were my customers. They were users of internal systems. Well, now we're just as likely to be doing systems and products for customers of the company through websites and so forth. So rather than trying to separate customers from users, we've brought them together with a single term meaning consumers. Anyone who consumes the products that we are creating. So are we creating requirements for these consumers? Well, let's find out. What do they do with if that's the case? Think about this. What does the user, the customer, they're involved, let's just use users, business stakeholders, what do they do with the requirements once they're approved? Absolutely nothing. They get put aside. I saw one business requirements document that I had worked on that was used to underneath the leg of a wobbly table. I was looking for something that might represent that, but right there in that stack are your last 3 business requirements documents for the last 3 systems that you did. You spent hours, weeks, months getting that great business requirements document. They got signed off. You had hours of review sessions. Everybody finally is happy with it. Everyone smiles on the face. They sign it. That's what happens to it because the customers don't care. They really didn't care about the requirements in the first place. All they cared about was the final end result, the solution to their problem. We say, okay, you're right. I shouldn't be doing it for the customers. I should be doing it for management. They're the ones who asked for it in the first place. Well, what do management need the requirements for? Well, yeah, they might, they need it for that contract, if in fact they look on it as a contract. But in my experience, most of them look at it as a check mark. It's a box that has to be checked on things. Get these requirements checked off, then the IT people, the systems, the solution team can get to work and get my solution up. We need this here in marketing. We need this new website to increase sales by 7%. The CEO and the board are on my back. Do I have to have requirements? Okay, there's the requirements. Get that done. Get on with the solution. Many times I've had a manager come in and say, hey, how hard would it be and how much would it cost to do this extra feature? And I say, well, actually, it won't cost anything because it's already in the requirements. We specified it earlier. So you check section 3. Oh, okay, cool, they're happy. So that's really, they're not concerned. Again, they could care less about requirements. If you could come in and they could say, hey, what I want is a new cash receipt system that balances the cash ledger. And I say, no problem, got you covered. And I go off and do it, they would be happy, especially if I came back and it worked. Well, okay, what about the solution team? Do we write requirements for the solution team? What would the solution team do with the requirements once they get them? After they've been approved, the solution team is pulling them apart, handing the pieces around to the various different developers. Maybe they're creating use cases, maybe they're creating user stories, maybe they're just coding directly from it, but they are using it. So ultimately, we're going to create it for the developers. If your requirements doesn't help the developers develop, solve the problem, well, maybe you ought to look at some other way of doing it. All right, one more time. Who defines it? The business analyst? Well, yeah, that's an expert in documentation. I don't know how many business analysts, I asked when I was writing the book, I was asking business analysts, what do you do? And one of the most common answers was document. So you got to say that business analyst is probably an expert in documentation, clearly knowledgeable about the product domain because they're over there talking, and fairly proficient in elicitation, what questions to ask and so forth. All right, maybe that's a good idea. And there you have a picture there. There's the developer, there's the consumer up there in the corner, and there's the business analyst translating or defining, helping define the requirements. How about the project manager? The project manager has the authority that the business analyst doesn't. So the project manager can alter the requirements and within those project constraints. And obviously, the project manager has significantly higher motivation to get the requirements done right because the project manager has a full responsibility for the requirements and the ultimate product that you deliver. Well, how about the solution team? The solution team needs to know what they need to know to affect the solution. Ultimately, what if we did this? Eliminate the middleman, business analyst or project manager, and have the solution team talk directly to the consumer. If we do that, then you're talking about a situation where there may not be a whole lot of formally written requirements. As a programmer, I didn't like doing documentation. I didn't like documenting the code that I wrote so that somebody could come after me. Eventually, I was getting to the point where I was saying, hey, listen, if you're going to have, somebody's going to pick up the code that I'm writing, they have to read the code, right? They have to know how to program. They have to know Fortran or PL1 or Pascal or whatever I happen to be coding in C++. I have put comments in the documentation. Why do I also have to write an outside document? Many of the people I worked for had no clue as to why. All they knew was part of the requirements, part of the standards. You got to do it. Now, you're going to ask me, you say, hey, Steve, I would like you to talk to the consumer and write up a requirements document. Oh, no. I want to code. That's what I do. I don't write. That is the primary issue right there. So let's talk about you, the business analyst, or you could be the project manager playing the role of the business analyst. You got to get requirements. So what's on your mind? Well, traditionally, our focus is, did I talk to the right people? Did I ask the right questions? Is there somebody else out there who has requirements I didn't get? Did they tell me all the requirements? Did I get them all? I think probably the biggest question, it was such a predominant question when I talked to business analysts that I wrote a 4-part set of articles on how to ask the right question, because they kept asking how to ask the right question. Well, not only that, but they're thinking, gee, the stakeholders always keep changing their mind. Can I get these requirements written, approved before they change their mind again? I mean, it'll never end. They just keep, they don't know what they want. They have no clue. And as we get close to the end, you're thinking, oh, I better check the spelling and grammar a second time. I don't want them to find any issues with it. They'll start doing picky things with the document itself. And oh yes, oh, the deadline is coming up Friday. I better get this thing done. I don't think I've got all the requirements, but I got to deliver it. In other words, the focus is on delivering that formal requirements document. That's my job. As I said, I talked to many business analysts, and a lot of them, I would say a good percentage of them, would say something like, my job is documenting the requirements. And it's hard not to believe that, since the majority of your time seems to be writing documents. Documents that end up in stacks of piles and check boxes and pulled apart maybe if the business analysts, I mean, if the developers use it. Well, why is that going on? What's happening here? So back when I was dating my wife, it came up during the conversation, I mentioned that I like shopping. I don't mind shopping. I don't remember what the conversation was, but she said, oh, it's great. And she said something to the effect of, well, you're the first guy I met who really likes shopping. That may have been a winning point for her. But we got married and went around shopping a little bit. And then, no, it didn't take long before she was going to shop on her own. And she, well, we're going shopping. You want to come shopping? Nah, no thanks. Well, I thought you liked shopping. I do like shopping. It turns out that our definition of shopping is different. See, when I shop, I go out, I know what I'm going to get, I go get it, I might do a little quick price comparison, get what I want, check it out, and I'm home in 15 minutes. I shopped. When my wife goes shopping, she takes all day. She's gone for hours. Then she comes back after, I've gone shopping for 3 or 4 hours. She comes back and she doesn't have nothing. You want me to help you with the bags? I'll go to the car and help you with the bags. I didn't buy anything. Well, what do you mean you didn't buy anything? You went shopping all day. You didn't buy anything? No, I didn't see anything that was worth buying. I saw nothing I wanted to buy. That is the difference. See, I don't go shopping, I go buying. She goes shopping. This is what is the difference between me as a developer, an engineer, and the business people, the consumers. They don't know what they want. Maybe I've heard this statement, they will know it when they see it. So what is it that you want? I'm not really sure, but I'll know it when I see it. Oh, I got a deadline. I can't wait till you see it. What do you mean you'll know when you see it? I need requirements. Tell me what to do. They have a vague idea of what has to happen. They may even have a vague idea of the problem. They don't even know really what the problem is. I'm on the other side. I've got to affect a solution. So I need something specific. I need unambiguous specification. I'm focused on the implementation. I can't say if this works, then this is a solution, but maybe not. And wait till you see what you want to see. I can't tell the computer, well, let's try a few things here. Go ahead and try this and that. I need to give them specific code, but on and off bytes and stuff. So we have to begin with a variance in the way we just look at things. And that's what I have considered to be a good analogy of what's behind all of our concerns here. So how are we going to address this, as well as all of the other issues that we've just brought up with requirements? And see if we still have to write them, and if so, is there a better way of doing it? First of all, it's the process. There's the process. We're going to define the problem, select a solution, theoretically select a solution. unfortunately, many times, as we pointed out, the problem is defined for you, and so is the solution. Or, here's the problem, this is what we want you to do. Again, solution set. Oh, here's the problem, one solution. Should we look for any more? No, we got a solution, move on. Jumping to solutions. In either case, I define the problem, somebody's got to sign off and say, yeah, that's the problem. I define the solution, yeah, that's the solution we want. Then I'm going to elicit information, analyze that information, define the requirements based on that information that has been analyzed, get them signed off, and then confirm the requirements. Yeah, that's pretty much the requirements process. Then I'm going to not go to the next step until I finish the previous step. Now, here's the thing. We talk Agile, Scrum, XP, FDD, phase-driven development, Evo, whatever we're going to do in Agile, or Kanban, Lean. We talk any other process, and not even software. I'm focusing on software here, but whatever else we're going to do, develop a new product, a new soap for washing clothes. It's the same process. We're still going to follow the same steps to define the requirements. But there's a difference in the process. What we're going to do as an alternative is still going to define the problem in whatever way we define the problem initially. That doesn't change. But all the other phases, stages, whatever we want to call them, colored boxes up there, we're going to do simultaneously or at least overlapping. Now, what does that mean? We're going to do this before we get the solution. That means that the consumers have got to be involved early and continuously. We're going to be eliciting information and analyzing the information and defining the requirements and then eliciting information again, over and over. We're going to have a solution and then we're going to do it again so that we can get the actual requirements out. Now, of course, the challenge there is getting the consumer to actually spend that much time and get involved, okay? The goal, regardless of the process, is an effective working solution that solves the problem completely and will be used to solve that problem. You might come up with a solution. We might write the exquisite software. It works perfectly. It's a masterwork, wins the Nobel Prize in systems, but the users or consumers don't like it. They don't use it. It hasn't solved the problem. So it's got to be effective and working, and it's got to be used in order to say it is successful. Well, let's look at some alternatives that will use different process here, but still give us requirements. Now, the first one comes from Scott Ambler, and this is called test-driven requirements is what he calls them. And the idea is that instead of starting at the front, we're going to start at the back. Now, one of the things I've always pushed in requirements is that no matter what you're doing in requirements, you need to have a way of testing every single requirement. Now, I kind of angled this as test first, which is another form that Agile's picked up with test-driven development and so forth. But the idea is that if I've got a requirement, I've got to be able to test it. And if I can't test it, the requirement is improper. So if you wrote, it's got the user, the interface has got to be user-friendly, I will say, well, how do I test user-friendly? And the answer is we can't test user-friendly, which means that I've got to write more specific, unambiguous requirements if we're going to create a requirements document. Well, this takes that one step further. We start out by having a discussion with the stakeholders. Well, that's good. That doesn't change much. Then we don't write requirements. We analyze them typically with the stakeholders, but then we're going to write test cases. Then we're going to review those test cases. Now, the phrase I typically use and have been using for a number of years is, how are you going to know that we have completed this phrase? How are you going to know that we solved your problem? You've got this feature you want. How are you going to know that the feature works for you? What do you need to see to prove to you that it works? They give me a set of answers to that. I need to see this, 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 and this. Those are the tests that I'm going to do. Now, once we've done that, then we can add in some more specifics, some non-functional requirements. We may add some new test cases. They may say, I need to see this as a result of the review, but we want to make sure that this will work in all situations. We may not get into corner cases and edge cases and so forth, but we want to make sure that's going to work. Then we build it. There's the build, there you are, coding away, and then we do the real test. We perform that test. Now at that, we could go back and say, let's take a look at the test. Obviously, we could go back and fix the software, but we could go back and say, is this correct? Gee, it's not coming out. The actual test is not working very well. So what is going on here? You said you wanted to see this, but we really can't show you this. Is there anything else you'd like to see? So it's an iterative process, going round and round. And then, of course, once we're done, we start all over again with the next set of functionality. That's the test-driven requirements process from Scott. Not a bad idea. It certainly doesn't vary greatly from the concept of the normal requirements. You're still writing things down. You're still going to have a list, formal, if you will, list of tests. And then you're going to be comparing them and maybe capturing the results. You're going to do a lot of automated testing, hopefully. What we can take away from this is it forces us to think of how each function, feature, or process will be tested as we're talking about them. How are you going to know this works? What do you need to see to prove to you that it works? What we're looking at is considering that requirements are statements of the successful completion of those functional tests. That's the requirement. We must get the system to do this, as opposed to we want the system to do this, the system will do this. There is what we want it to do. We want it to pass this test. And the test can be both functional and non-functional requirements. As I mentioned earlier, but test first, same concept. If you cannot create a test, then the requirement is not stated clearly, it's unambiguous, and it should be revised in itself. Ultimately, the test cases become the requirements and could be formalized in that way. But see, here's the thing. When you do formalize the test cases, you already wrote the system and you used it. You're verifying the test cases by running tests. So you say, here are the requirements, and there's the system. Now, that's not too far from one particular client contract I had back in the 90s. We guaranteed that our resulting system would match the requirements 100%. No variance whatsoever. Now imagine you just wrote a set of requirements, had them approved, and you're going to be delivering the system January 1st, 2024. And you are guaranteeing that what you wrote today and got approved tomorrow is going to be exactly what's going to be delivered January 1st, 2024. Have you ever had a system that happened on? See, I never did, other than 2 or 3 that we did in the 90s that we guaranteed this would happen. Okay, so you're saying, all right, what's the trick? Not that big of a trick. We wrote the requirements. It was a prototyping thing. You'll see prototyping coming up here. And we developed the requirements as we went. When we delivered the system, some 15 months later, this is for an insurance company north of Chicago in Evanston, Illinois, and we delivered the system in 15 months. We also, at that time, delivered the requirements. As we evolved the system, we also evolved the requirements. guaranteed to match because we made it match. The clients all agreed to that because they wanted the requirements to express what the users, expected out of the system, and they used it kind of a training manuals and other things. So they still wanted the formal written requirements, but we didn't have to go through change control and all of that because we delivered the requirements with the system, and they were guaranteed to be the same. Well, that's what this does. When the test cases are delivered, it's after they have been tested, which means the system is tested. So, okay, that's one way of doing it. We still have formal written requirements, but how about good old agile? Now, I was trying to do this to represent my experience with extreme programming, doing the planning game as an example, and I couldn't get a stack of index cards to show up there decently. So you have to imagine that right there where I'm the developer there on the right-hand side, and younger, of course, with no beard. And and maybe you imagine where my pen is, there's a deck of cards right there. And the business stakeholder, we've gone through a process before this point of prioritizing the user stories. Now, the user stories is in a deck now. The one on top is the most important. So we start with that one. And we have a conversation. As Scott again and Ron Jeffries and others say, that the user story is not a requirement. No user story is a requirement. A user story is a token of conversation. It's something to remind you to talk to the user about. So we have this story, and I say, okay, what does this mean? And the consumer says this and this about it. And while the consumer is answering my questions, you can see my pen there, I'm writing. I'm taking notes about what I am going to do to get this thing, implement this particular feature on this card. And they might say that we need to process accounts. So I want to know what the account is, and he says the count is 6 digits. So I write down 6 digits. Is it always numeric? Yes, it's always numeric. Is there any pattern to it that I should be aware of? What do I do when you enter a wrong one? Just give them an error. I'm writing all this down. You see. At the end, I might also say, okay, how are you going to know that we have completed this user story? What do you need to see? And I'll flip the page over and write down what they ask, and now I've got the test case. What I have just done is write the requirements. The card is not a requirement. The card is just a placeholder for us to talk about that particular feature. The requirements are what I write as the developer. I write down the requirements. That's what I have to do to make that feature that he wants come up and work. Now, when I get the code running, he looks at it, runs a test, says, this is perfect, this is absolutely what I want. That paper that I wrote the requirements on is in the trash. No sense in keeping it. Nobody else could be able to read it anyway, because I wrote it for myself. I'm the only one who needs it. I'm writing the code. Those are requirements. Not formal. You don't have to, business analyst doesn't have to write a thing. You say, wait a minute, oh, so hold on, Steve. Are you saying, just like that previous slide, you're going to eliminate us completely? Well, no. You could take either side of this, but you have to be cautious. You could represent the business stakeholder. So I replaced that word stakeholder with the word analyst. And you could be talking to me if you had full knowledge of the stakeholder and you can answer all my questions. That's fair. To be on the other side, you as the developer, as the business analyst talking to the business stakeholder, which is what you would do traditionally, that might not be because you don't know, unless you're very technical and you are a defrocked programmer, you might not know the questions to ask that I need to know to write the code. So that might not work, and that's always been the issue. Business analysts get the requirements for the business, and we developers then are kind of left on our own to make up stuff. Where the business analyst is here, on the other side of the business stakeholder, off to the left someplace, they are helping the business stakeholders write the user stories in the first place. They're helping the business stakeholders know what it is that they want. That's a great job for business analysts. You're not writing a whole lot of documentation. You're sitting down advising and consulting and helping right there. As opposed to being focused on writing documents, you're focused on solving problems. Well, there's another one, the last option or alternative that we're going to talk about here, not the overall last alternative. And this one I stole from design thinking, got well into design thinking and adopted some of theirs for things like requirements, which is another problem to solve. Now, we've established that the consumers don't know what they want. They're out there shopping, looking at windows and seeing if there's anything that might attract them, and they'll know it when they see it. So we're going to do prototyping. And we start off by discussing this with the user. And we keep discussing this until we all have a good idea. Now, when I talk about this group, we're talking about the cross-functional group of not just the direct users or consumers, but also others, anybody who might possibly be affected by this. And we are discussing it to make sure we understand the problem domain. We have empathy with the users. Now we have a good idea of what's going on in the problem domain. We define what the problem is and get a solution idea. Now, note, I'm talking about a solution idea, not the solution. By referring to it, and this is something you might also consider so that you're not documenting a solution, come up with solution ideas. That means that any particular idea may not be the one we have to use. If it's the solution, everyone's wedded to it, we're forced to use it. But if it's a solution idea, then it could be one of many. There could be a better solution out there. And it reminds us that this is just an idea of a solution. And we don't have to get too specific at this time either. Now that we have a solution idea that we're going to use, out of many probably, we're then going to describe what we need to do to see if that solution idea will actually work. We're going to create a quick and dirty, inexpensive prototype that we can throw away without guilt, without a major amount of loss if it doesn't work the way we want. Now remember, the we here is the combination of the solution team and the consumers and business analysts and so forth. Now, once we have an idea of what we're going to do to prototype it, we do it. We do it. Do. There we go. Do. We do it. This is, for those of you who are familiar with PDCA, there we are. This is basically the first three are part of the planning. Now we're doing it. And now we're going to check. We're going to deliberate. That's I was trying to come up with everything that starts with a D, so we're reviewing it. Did it work? Did it not work? In some cases, we want to use the scientific method using falsification. If we've got 3 or 4 ideas, we might want to eliminate the ideas that don't work, like Thomas Edison eliminating the filament combinations that didn't work. So at this point, we're going to review it. What happened and did it work? That might cause us to destroy the prototype. Didn't work, throw it away. We might say, okay, listen, this didn't work doing it this way. Maybe if we change the prototype a little bit, let's try it again. Or we might, if everything works fine, it's really good, gee, it looks great, we might deliver it. So if we deliberate, if we say, yeah, it didn't quite work, or, or we destroy it, we go back and discuss it. That's the idea of prototyping. We are not coming up with a finished product, allowing us the ability to just say, okay, let's try it again. Now, built into this, of course, is the acceptance of failure. If everyone says, what do you mean it didn't work, and gets upset, then this is not going to work. We've got to know that out of 20 solution ideas that we have, 19 of them may fail. And we're going to have to go through all 19 to find the one that will work. And that's the one we're going to deliver. But we're not delivering anything to production. We're going to deliver it from here to the consumer, the other people who are not in that room creating the prototype. We might polish it up a little bit, make it a little bit nicer. We might have 2 or 3 alternative solutions, and we do A/B testing with the consumers. But they're going to also go through the same thing. They're going to discuss it, define what they're doing, give us some information, a lot of feedback. Nowhere in here are we going to take a whole lot of time to write down major formal requirements. At the point that the consumers say, yes, this is it, we then get permission to do the project, or this might be the first part of the project. We shall go to the developers. Hey, Steve, here's the prototype. Build that. I don't need to have a lot of written thing. I've got something I can then, as a demonstration right there in front of me. Okay, yeah, I can do that. Let me start writing the real code to do that. Here's some storyboards, and there's the explanation there in pictures down below it. Can you do that? Oh yeah, I can do that. A lot easier than go through section 1.1.6.9.18. And when you get there, it says reference C section 27.3.4.9. Ah, hey, this is cool. Likely to get much higher quality, closer to actually what will be used as a solution. Well, do we need formal documentation? Let's look at the problem domain and the solution domain again. Here's the problem domain. That right there is design thinking. That's the 5-stage design thinking from Stanford University D School. Okay. At the end of this prototyping process, we're going to have a business case or some other formal document that is used by your organization to justify, get funding for a project to solve the problem. Yes, I agree that is a problem, and yes, we should fund it. That's the first place where we actually have any idea of money or anything else. Now note, I have something that might represent requirements. That will give us scope, time, schedule, and cost. So we're going back to what theoretically we should be doing with requirements in the first place. Now, this business case clearly is a formal document. It's one that may be kept. We compare the results at the end with what the business case said to make sure that we did the project. It's a contract between whoever has the money and whoever's going to be doing it. At that point, we have the project charter. Okay, we're going to start the project with the project charter. That project charter is another formal document. And project charters typical tend to stay along. And now, the neat thing about business cases and project charters, they don't tend to change. And you have the organization tends to keep them exactly the way they are, so you can compare, this is what we thought 2 years ago, and this is where we are now. So they can see what variations might exist. They keep them as contracts. So, that obligation we talked about might not be there. Now that we have a project charter, we go in to develop the solution. There's an example. Many of you are familiar with Scrum. There's Scrum. And at the end, we're going to deliver a releasable, potentially releasable product increment. And notice that I did the arrow here. The arrows represent formal documents. That increment obviously is formal. It's something we're going to keep. It's a piece of software. It's a new website. It's a new way of collecting money from new way of assessing fraud in these credit cards. Whatever it happens to be, but it may or may not actually be formal at that time because it's only an increment. So the formal documentation, the formal document, which is the deliverable, may not be there for another 2 or 3 months whenever it's actually fully released. There's your formal documentation, okay? So while we're doing the requirements, we don't have any formal documentation, and we're not passing any formal documentation over to the developers. They're going to work everything from the backlog or from the user stories or from our prototype. Now you might say, hey, Steve, the product backlog, isn't that a formal document? Well, no, not as we would consider it, because the product backlog is not signed off by anybody, and it's completely changeable. It's constantly changing. In fact, as you complete backlog items, they move into the sprint backlog and they're completed at the end of the sprint. They're removed physically from the product backlog. Imagine doing that with your requirements document, having the requirements document of 74 pages, and as you did completed a requirement, got it running, you removed it from the document. So the final document is nothing if you got everything done, or the only things left are the ones we decided not to do. No, we wouldn't do that, but that's the product backlog. So therefore, we can say the product backlog is not a formal document, or at least not a formal requirements document. So one more time, do we need to write requirements? Well, in a word, yes, yes. It is unlikely that any form of collaboration, communication, problem-solving, analysis, or anything else which you're dealing with multiple people can be done without anybody writing anything down. Let's face it, especially when you're a consultant or working with a consulting team, creating requirements, the requirements themselves are a deliverable, so obviously they're going to be written down and formally and checked and edited and so forth. But then again, not necessarily, because what is written down may not actually be the requirements that we're using to write the code. In other words, in the classic words of the classic consultant, it depends. So you say, what does that have for us in the future? We're going to say goodbye to classic requirements, business requirements documents, system specifications, not going away completely. There is still a place for them. We still need to do, there's still requirements engineers out there. They get the math and the measurements and all that. We're going to build a software for a spaceship. There's going to be engineering involved. So we're going to need requirements, especially if we've got multiple companies working together. But certainly we're going to get a lot less big requirements documents where we're spending months putting them together. Long, arduous requirements review sessions. I can remember review sessions on the phone that lasted 8 hours. 8 hours, imagine 8 hours on a review session. The additional overhead of that whole requirements development cycle you can say goodbye to. What we're going to say hello to is collaborative requirements, user stories, conversations where we talk about what is needed. The business analyst focus is helping the business people, the consumers, understand what they want. Requirements that evolve with changes on a constant basis. Every requirement we rewrite, we say this can change. We're looking at more prototyping or trying it on for size. If they're out shopping, why didn't you buy anything? Nothing fit. Oh. And ultimately, just enough requirements to get some coding going, get some development going. Just enough so that we can get started. Start getting that feedback to help us write better requirements for the rest of the system. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tracy. I think we have a few minutes left here for requirements.
Thank you, Steve, again for that great presentation. We are at the top of the hour, but I am going to run over a little bit. So just a quick time check for those that need to leave. And let's try and answer a couple of questions. Steve, our first question. Oh, and I've just lost it. My apologies. All right. How do you create the permanent historical record of what we built with these more agile approaches?
Well, in many cases, the zealots, the purists, will tell you that you don't need any permanent record. All of everything that we did in development is in the code. We write a line of code, we write a line of documentation explaining what we did. All of our decisions that we're making, technological decisions, are there as well. Business decisions and all that are over on the problem domain and not having anything to do with us. We're agile, we're on the solution side. So all the business decisions that you make, you have to document that yourself. Now that would be the purist, but even XP, which is extreme, literally, it's called extreme program, it is extreme, where they would not be doing any documentation. Kent Beck says at the end of his book that when the project is over, we're going to write a description of what we did from 30,000 feet so that people coming on behind us will have an easier job of coming in and getting oriented. No great diagrams, no 50-page document, just a high level, this is what we did. Everything else is in the code from a technological perspective. You say, well, what about the business perspective? The consumers aren't going to read the code. That's over on the problem domain. And that is a great job for business analysts in terms of describing the system for, this is what the system does in a more, this is as it's going on. And I press this button and this happens. And I do this all in present tense. That would be, that's a perfectly fine thing to do. Without that, it's going to be signed off and all of the overhead involved with writing requirements up front.
Thanks, Steve. Our next question, let's try and get two more quick questions in. How do we get the owner or client to engage in all that iterative discussion?
But bottom line, hey, this is your system. Do you want it to work the way how do you want it to work? What do you need to see in order to prove to you that it works? Putting the shoe on their foot, as opposed to, I can't tell you how many times that I've gotten the job to do, and whoever gave me the job is gone. I know when we worked at a major financial system, that was a company, that was the way it was done. Here's the budget, here's what we want it done. Now 2 pages of this is what we want. And then you couldn't get those people to talk to you anymore. And then, of course, the system didn't work the way they wanted until finally management came down and said, we're going to stop doing this. We want you to assign a minimum of 1 person from your group to work with the developers. And that helped. So the thing is to put the responsibility on their shoulders. What do you need to see to prove to you that it works? Ultimately, they have to, that's their job, is to say, yeah, this works for me. Ultimately, they're going to be using it. They're going to be living it. It's going to be their life. They're going to be using it day in, day out. Now, we can't do that as much with the external customers. That we have to depend a lot of times on marketing and others to do for us, especially for the solution team. Many business analysts today are now working with marketing and going out and talking to consumers. I don't know if you are. I don't know if that's something that you say, hey, that sounds good, fun to me, do a focus group and that type of thing. You might say, no, I don't want to deal with customers. But a lot are moving in that direction. It's still business, and they're still doing analysis. Right down the sweet spot of business analysis. But mostly internal, hey, this is what you want. Are you sure you want it? Good. Then how are you going to know that it's working? What are you going to need to see? If you're not involved, you're taking a chance that the nerds over there are going to design it the way they like it. And you really don't want that to happen.
Thanks, Steve. We are out of time. I'm just going to get in one more really quick question here. Hopefully it can be quick, but here's an issue. Multiple user stories for a period for one feature or function, and then a bug is identified. However, we're not really sure if it's a bug or not, because we must go back and find all the user stories and acceptance criteria to determine if it's a bug or not. It's exhausting. How do we know the final requirements or business rules over a period of time is the question.
That sounds like a contract issue. I don't mean like with a real contract. Rather than collaboration. Agile wants collaboration. We value collaboration over contract negotiation. The question I would ask, without any knowledge, and you're welcome to give me more details, and my email address is there in front of you. To me, I would say, I don't care whether this bug, and it sounds like a bug that somebody says you're not doing this. And you have to go back and find the story that specified doing that in the first place. See, from my perspective is, it's not doing this, well, it's a story to do it. Put it on backlog, and the product owner wants it done in the next sprint, we'll get it done. If it comes from a previous story, who cares? Bottom line, it's got to get done. It's got to be software that's usable by the client. Now, the only reason I can think of that you would want to know whether it's been done or not, whether it's on a story, is, hey, we agreed to do the stories for this much money. You're saying that this is a bug and it wasn't done, and you specified it in those stories for that much money. We're saying that we don't think it's necessarily specified, and if it's not specified, then you've got to add more money. You see, that becomes contractual. But from an Agile perspective, the bug is just another change. Even if it's a defect in the code that you wrote, then of course you obviously know the story if it's a defect in something that should have happened. But I'm suspecting that when you say bug, you're talking about something that was supposed to happen and hasn't happened. And the customer is saying, this should have been there because we wrote a story on it. And you're saying, I got to find the story because I'm not sure it is. Say, I wouldn't bother finding the story. I just go do it. Whether it's a story or not, it's still going to be done. So get it done. From an Agile perspective.
Well, thank you, Steve. Again, thank you for such a great presentation. You're always such a delight to listen to. We are out of time right now, so I am going to wrap it up. We'd like to thank everyone for attending today's Modern Analyst webinar, and a reminder that today's webinar, along with the slides, will be archived at the ModernAnalyst.com website within 2 business days. This concludes today's event, and we hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Again, Steve, thanks so much. We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.